Hello and welcome to Family Foundation Friday on the Authority of Love. I'm your host, Greg Williams, joined by our co-host, Mr. David Walls of the Family Foundation. Thank you, David, for joining me again, brother.
It's good to be with you, Greg.
And thank you all as listeners or viewers, however you may be joining us. Thank you, and thank you for your prayers, and thank you for sharing this. We continue to hear more. I do. I think you do as well, right? Of people that are picking up these things and encouraging us. And so we thank people for that.
Yep, absolutely.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Greg.
Yeah.
So it's there's a countdown that's going in my head because it's only a little over a week before the governor's veto period starts, which is a very important deadline because a number of the bills that we're supporting, that you and I talk about regularly, are unfortunately bills that the governor's likely to veto. So those bills have to get across the finish line before that deadline, so that when the governor inevitably does veto legislation during the essentially 2 weeks that he has, the General Assembly on the last 2 days of the session in mid-April have an opportunity to come back and override those vetoes. So
we'll be talking about some of those today, but probably the 27th and the following week, you're going to get quite a bit on that, especially the 27th, to make sure that we kind of get these across the finish line. Want to remind you again, because it's still ongoing, the situation in Iran, praying for our leaders and the American people, as well as the Iranian people, Christians, non-Christians, all of the Middle East. We
our
want
military,
to continue our military and their families, absolutely. War is not a pretty thing, and yet we know in a fallen world, I think it was George Washington said one of the best ways you can ensure peace was to be always ready at all times for war if needed. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is in a fallen world. And part of the reason we battle even for life and for these laws and these kind of things. So, David, there's been a couple of things that have happened, and I know you want to touch on these. Last week, I kind of closed by saying the thread running through a lot of this stuff is sexual immorality being pushed on our children and snatched out of the hands of parents and those kind of things. There was a Supreme Court ruling last week on a California case that was very important. Yeah,
it was, I think, a little more than a week ago, Greg, but really a monumental decision. Kind of a procedural decision, but it's monumental because of what it does and what it's hopefully going to represent for other cases like it. So folks may have heard about this, but we just wanted to break it down a little bit more because it's really, really important. So the Supreme Court essentially told California schools, you can't lie to parents anymore. And so this deals with a case that was started back in 2023 called Mirabella versus Bonta, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But essentially, there were California teachers who had filed suit against because of California state law and because of some specific policies in the school district that they were in, where educators were essentially being forced to deliberately hide students' so-called gender transitions
while encouraging them to move in that direction. They found out.
And using a student's preferred pronoun. Unfortunately, kind of the whole 9 yards of the gender dysphoria. And so they had filed suit against this. Initially, there was an injunction put in place against California from doing this, but it was appealed by the state of California. It went up to the still very liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Got better, but I can't believe this one.
The Ninth Circuit essentially overruled them, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, California, you can't do this. Now, they're still probably going to get to the merits of the argument at a future date, but essentially, this is a very important victory for parental rights. It's actually, Greg, even a victory for religious freedom because there was recognition in the ability. Part of the reason why parents have a right to know all the information, especially when you're talking about sexuality issues, is because parents' religious beliefs are front and center when we're talking about sexuality issues and their ability to want to direct their children, in a religious, I would hope, biblical understanding of human sexuality, of biological sex, of gender, and all that that entails. But I'll just mention, or read just a quote, Greg. It said that essentially the parents who objected to the California policies on free exercise grounds are likely to succeed on the merits, and that these policies likely violate parental rights and the right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. Now, that is just really key, because that is a fundamental right that we have recognized in this country, that parents are the ones that have a right to direct the upbringing of their children. And so it is incredibly important that this was recognized. And Greg, there's something like, I was reading something like 40 other cases similar to this.
Yes.
In different federal
country.
courts across the country. So this really bodes well for a future in which you're going to see courts uphold and affirm the parental rights and hopefully stop some of this nonsense that's going on. I would say, you would say, okay, well, California's a crazy blue state, maybe not as surprised. But I want to remind folks about something, Greg. Back in late 2022, here in Kentucky, under our current governor, the Department of Education here in Kentucky, if folks remember, put forward guidelines to all schools in Kentucky doing some of these exact similar things, saying you have to go along with preferred pronouns of students and you need to hide that information from parents. And so thankfully, that was addressed in the SB 150, which did a lot of really important things, including banning gender transitions on children. But one of the things in the parental rights context in education piece of that bill was say the Department of Education has no right to put out policies essentially to hide information from parents.
Go against the law.
Right, absolutely. Right? But so again, just a reminder, you think, okay, this is California. I'm glad California was smacked down by the Supreme Court. Here in Kentucky, statewide, under our current governor, we had these same kind of policies being promoted. And so, again, this hits close to home, but I'm incredibly thankful by what the Supreme Court did here.
Well, it hit close to home to everybody. Like you said, 40 or more cases around the country where it's going to impact it, and hopefully they will continue to be resolved in a good way. I would add a couple other things as I was reading about the case, David. Number one, the Supreme Court said, you need to take care of this immediately.
Yeah.
You need to do it right now. They recognized what was going on and the damage being done to children. The other thing, though, was there was some people that commented, and I agreed with them. The three strongest opinions, I think, in the majority decision said, we want to uphold parents' rights based on the historicity and the tradition of our nation. And that's very good. And parental rights have been upheld for a long time. But what I would love to see is they would have gone in line and said, hey, also in keeping with the biblical truths and natural law. There we are again, going disordered. And we end up with chaos. And so a lot going on there. Continue to pray about that because it does impact us. Another thing we've been talking about that we hopefully are going to get some momentum behind us on the federal level, the national level, is Senator Josh Hawley last week submitted a bill.
Yes, it's a very, very important piece of legislation that's being introduced at the federal level. There was a press conference, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, other pro-life allies, including our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom, Christian Wagner. Their CEO was there. Interestingly enough, Greg, so Senator Hawley's wife is an attorney for Alliance Defending Freedom that's actually argued cases at the United States Supreme Court. So he was probably getting some good counsel from his wife on this front. Yes. But no, this is incredibly important. So the legislation that's being introduced at the federal level would essentially revoke the FDA approval of mifepristone. That's the abortion, the main, what I like to call
chemical abortion.
What I like to call the abortion death pill. Because when it's taken in this context, the design is to kill an unborn child.
And most of the time that happens, unfortunately.
Yes, and a very high percentage, especially compared to surgical abortions, women are harmed from this deadly pill as well. So it essentially would strip it of its approval by the FDA if it's prescribed for the purpose of abortion, which is just incredibly important because the FDA has essentially been allowing these mail order shipments to flood the country. Yeah. We're seeing even here in Kentucky, Greg, that the proliferation of this deadly pill is essentially making the pro-life laws in states like Kentucky and other states ineffective because these pills are coming in. And preborn Kentuckians every day, based on the numbers from the abortion industry, are losing their lives. It's something like, Greg, approaching 70%, if it hasn't already across 70% of all abortions are taking place because of the chemical abortion pill, the abortion death pill. So this is
the part where we talk about in our bill in the Kentucky and many others.
Yeah,
they're illegally trafficking a pill that is causing something to happen that has been made illegal in our state.
Right. And so it's incredibly important here in Kentucky that we address it. You mentioned House Bill 646, which is the legislation to make abortion pill trafficking, to add more enforcement mechanisms to it. But look, and this is something Senator Hawley said in the press conference, only Congress can kind of address this situation in its totality across the country because Congress is the one that has the ability to regulate the flow of these drugs interstate. Right. And so it is, while we still want Kentucky and other states are looking at different ways of trying to address the situation as they can at the state level, we have got to have our leaders at the federal level step in. And look, Greg, this is an area where, and I'm just going to say it, the Trump administration has been very disappointing on this issue.
I agree.
They have not done enough. In fact, it's just not that long ago, a month, 2 months ago, Greg, where the FDA actually approved another generic version of the abortion death pill.
Just exacerbating this whole thing.
Right. And so we're still living right now, Greg, under a regime on the abortion death pill that was essentially put in place by the Biden administration because they removed, even though the pill had, I believe, erroneously been approved because the FDA shouldn't be approving pills that kill people on purpose. Right. But even with that, there used to be some safety precautions that were put in place to protect women from the harms inevitably that come from this deadly pill. But all of those were removed, and we haven't even seen up until this point the Trump administration put back in place some of the regulations. So again, there's been things obviously that we're very thankful that the Trump administration does, but this is an issue where we have to have our federal leaders work. And Greg, as I said, the issue of abortion is an issue that we have to advocate at the federal level, we have to advocate at the state level, we have to advocate at the local level, and we have to be willing to proclaim in our churches, in our families. I mean, all of the above. When you're dealing with a culture that has been as harmed by the culture of death that we have been, it's not a one or the other, it's an all-in approach on all fronts.
Yeah. And David, I would echo that and say this, with what you said about President Trump, I think he has been sort of taking the road that says we're going to go back to the federalistic approach. But the problem with that is if you give the states the ability to make their own laws and then you don't at the federal level help to enforce those, you're not being a federalist. You're not pushing the right things. And that's what I think Senator Hawley's law here will do. It will allow federalism to work the way it should. If your state says no, and I wish all states would say no to abortion, right? It's unthinkable. Yeah. But if your state says no, then we're going to do what we can to help you honor that. And those that say yes, we're going to allow them to do it, sadly enough. But that's true federalism. So we need to keep this in mind and keep praying. Many more that we've been talking about, we didn't this week, but go to the KentuckyFamily.org website for action and prayer items on that. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your prayers. Thanks always to the Lord. I'm your host, Greg Williams, joined by co-host David Walls, and you're listening to Family Foundation Friday on the Authority of Love.